Well, I wanted to just express appreciation to be invited to speak for the for this webinar session. Bacteria is a very dear heart for me. In fact, I started out as a volunteer monitor for bacteria. If we'll go on to the our next slide here, what is fecal bacteria? The picture that you see over there is something I remember from my childhood from one of the Naked Gun movies, where the Lieutenant Drebin was coming up from the trying to infiltrate a criminal gang or something like that, and came up right in front of a sewer outfall. And that was actually one of the things that I remember from my childhood that made me want to kind of get into the environmental field from seeing that. But so I'm here today to talk about fecal bacteria. Fecal bacteria is basically bacteria that's associated with warm-blooded animal waste. That could be human waste, mammals, and birds. And when we talk about fecal bacteria, we generally talk about three different types of bacteria. Each state has their own standards. Some don't monitor all three. We do in Virginia. In Virginia, we monitor for E. coli for freshwater recreational purposes. Enterococcus is monitored for saltwater in Virginia. Some states use enterococcus for freshwater. And then fecal coliform is an old standard. We used to have that in Virginia. We discontinued that in 2003. But we still monitor for fecal coliform because it's still linked tightly to the shellfish standard for eating raw shellfish. And so when we look at fecal bacteria numbers as a state agency, and this goes with any state, when you get above a certain threshold, that generally is associated with an increased risk of illness due to swimming or eating of raw shellfish. On our next slide here, just to go into a little bit of additional background for why Virginia monitors for fecal bacteria. We monitor it because, again, there's that association with human illness due to high levels of bacteria levels, high bacteria levels. In Virginia, it is one of the largest impairment causes in the stream, in our streams and rivers. Back in 2012, it was about 9,154 miles. I just looked at our recent assessment report, and we're now nearly 11,000 miles of our waterways are impaired because of fecal bacteria. We've also seen, and many other states also, when they monitor for bacteria, when you see high levels of bacteria in water, that generally is associated with other issues because bacteria, when it enters the waterway, it enters the same way as like nutrients and sediment. They all kind of come through the same pathways, such as runoff pollution. The little picture on the right is one of my very first YouTube videos I ever made that talks about volunteer monitoring and bacteria monitoring.
And it's a fantastic video.
On our next slide is just a quick outline of the various different bacteria methods that are commonly used across the country. However, I'm going to be speaking specifically of two methods because they're used in Virginia by our volunteer monitoring groups and also by my particular agency, the Department of Environmental Quality. And that is ColiScan Easy Gel and the ColAlert and InterAlert method. When we talk about ColiScan, ColiScan Easy Gel is a really great method. It's been very popular with our volunteers in Virginia. It monitors and looks only at E. coli. It doesn't detect fecal coliform or enterococcus. However, it doesn't require a laboratory. You can basically do this in your kitchen. It's very inexpensive, less than $3 a sample compared to maybe $30 for a laboratory-based method. And you can get reasonable results. It is not an EPA-approved method, and that's due specifically because the E. coli colonies are somewhat hard to identify because you're looking at kind of a color range. On the right, you'll see a picture there of one of our ColiScan plates. The E. coli colonies you should be able to pick out. There's 5 E. coli on there that are the dark blue to royal purple colors on that particular Petri dish. Real quickly, the ColiScan method. It's, again, a very simple method. You use 1 to 5 milliliters of sample. You basically add the your sample water into a bottle of thawed media. You mix it and pour it onto a specially treated Petri dish. And that liquid media will turn into a gel very similar to an agar plate gel. And after incubation, you will score your plates. And again, you're looking for those dark blue to royal purple color colonies. Because of the popularity of ColoScan, I did create a series of YouTube videos on how to do the method. In about 45 minutes, anybody can be an expert on using ColoScan. It is that simple. And on our next slide here, I wanted to just really briefly put a shout out to one of our volunteers in Virginia. Her name is Anna Humphrey. She's a high school junior, and she actually developed a computer program that when you add a picture of your ColoScan Petri dish, you just take a photograph of your plate and you upload it to a website, it can count the number of E. coli colonies, and it does a very accurate, has a very high accuracy. Right now it's about 95%. She's trying to get more photographs submitted to that website so we can get towards a 99 or higher percent accuracy rate. But I've been very impressed with her. I've worked with her since the very beginning on this. She's gotten quite a few accolades through our STEM. She just recently got an award from the governor as a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM award for what she's done. And I just always find it very inspiring for someone that's in high school to be able to do something so advanced and can have such a great impact in the world. Now, outside of ColoScan is kind of the intro method that a lot of our volunteers in Virginia use. The more advanced method is the call alert method or the inner alert method. And the reason I use them interchangeably is because the method itself is pretty much identical. The only difference is the type of media that's being used. It's a very popular laboratory method because it's very simple to do. You don't really have to have as much of the equipment that you normally would have for more expensive methods like membrane filtration protocols. You get the results in about 24 hours. It is an EPA-approved method, and the only downside that we've seen with the call alert and inner alert methods has been that if you're near an optical brightener interference or source such as a paper mill outfall or laundry outfall, you can, the optical brighteners that are found in that waste can give a fluorescent color underneath the UV, and that's what you're looking for in this method. That can give you a false positive, but those types of interferences are extremely rare and are pretty much known in advance to sampling. The call alert method and inner alert method, it's a very simple method. Unlike the ColoScan, you actually use 100 milliliters of water of your sample, so you can get a full sample range with that. You can use a subsample if need be, but you have to dilute it with dilution water. You basically add the media to your sample water, pour it into a tray, and it's put through a special sealer which seals it. And after incubation, you score the samples. For the call alert protocol, you get E. coli colonies, which are yellow, indicating that they're coliform bacteria, and they glow underneath the UV light. So if you see a yellow color well and it glows, it's E. coli. With Enterococcus, it's only looking for that glow. There's no yellow color associated with it. We recently developed a training video in partnership with one of our volunteer groups, the Ravenna Conservation Alliance. This 45-minute video goes through the entire process of collecting samples to processing them using the call alert method, and it's accessible using that YouTube link on that slide. On the next slide here is just a quick summary of the various different methods that are out there. This is based upon some market research that we've done. The ColoScan and the call alert, inner alert methods are on the right-hand side. And you'll note that compared to the other methods, these are very inexpensive. And they also provide very good quality results. You get a very good range of results. Now, if you are going to adopt a new method, you're like, well, this call alert looks like a great method. Well, It is, but you got to beware. And this applies to anything, even outside of bacteria monitoring. This is what keeps me as a QA officer employed. When you have a new method, you're probably going to have a different detection limit, or you're going to have different accuracy or precision thresholds compared to your older method. It's very important to keep your records of when your methods change for future reference. And then if you do see changes in your data, that you're able to account for those changes, or what we would call step trends, when you're analyzing and reporting your results. The graph that you see over on the right-hand side is the average bacteria numbers from all of our stations that we monitor each year across the entire state of Virginia. You'll notice that in 2015 and 2016, the E. coli numbers were significantly higher than they were prior to that time. Well, it wasn't because Virginia all of a sudden got worse in terms of we had a lot more bacteria, there was a lot more rainfall, or anything like that. It was because we switched to the call alert protocol in late 2014. Prior to that, we were using a membrane filtration method, which our maximum detection limit was 2,000 colonies per 100 milliliters. With the call alert, we were able to get over 24,000 bacteria. Because of that, even though we have a similar method, similar accuracy or quality assurance associated with it, that higher detection limit, when we have like rain events, we're able to more accurately capture those high bacteria flushing events. On our next slide, next couple slides here, I just wanted to just outline what we do in Virginia with citizen monitoring. Citizen monitoring has been very beneficial. Has been a very beneficial enterprise with DEQ. It's a two-way street. But specifically on how citizen groups help DEQ, we get a vastly increased amount of data coverage because of citizen monitoring sites. They can help us with total maximum daily load, or TMDL, monitoring activities, identify sewer spills and other pollution hotspots. And we also gotten a very high leverage of return of our investment in terms of staff time and grant dollars. On our next slide here, I did want to outline some very important things that we do not use citizen data for. We do not use citizen data to perform enforcement actions or other similar regulatory actions. This is actually part of our citizen monitoring bill that was passed in the late 90s. So we will not use citizen data to sue a wastewater treatment plant for failing to meet their discharge limits. If we do get citizen groups to say, hey, we think something's going on here, we will go out as an agency and our staff will collect samples, and we will use our own collected data if we do determine that a regulatory action such as taking someone to court is required. Pardon me. We also do not use citizen data by itself to develop a TMDL implementation plan. There's always some DEQ data involved. However, citizen groups can be very helpful in expanding the amount of data that is being put together for a TMDL. On our next couple slides, just real quickly, I just wanted to show, the first one shows the amount of stations that we get monitored by citizen groups and other organizations. In our latest integrated report, which was passed in for 2016, we received almost 2,500 stations from citizen and non-agency groups. That's almost a third of the amount of stations that were included in that report. On the next slide here, you'll actually see a map showing the locations of these citizen and what we call non-agency sites. Just real briefly, non-agency groups are other local governments, state or federal government agencies, private businesses that are not a citizen monitoring group. But in Virginia, the vast majority of data that is submitted to us is from citizen groups. And it has a pretty well coverage across the entire state. On the next slide is just a table showing how much of the state's been covered because of the monitoring specifically by citizen groups. In our latest report, we received almost 3,800 stream miles worth of data from citizen groups 89 square miles of estuaries, which includes a significant chunk of the Chesapeake Bay, and about 15,500 acres of lakes. Now, when we use citizen data for TMDLs, we have had a lot of really great successes because there's a lot of opportunities for citizens to be involved with the TMDL process. We can get additional data to help us develop a more targeted and finely tuned TMDL program or TMDL implementation plan. They can also, citizens can help monitor sites when we're moving away to focus efforts on other TMDL projects so they can still continue to collect data while we are away to see if things are improving or not, and also to track the improvement of best management practices that are installed because of the TMDL. And citizens have also been very instrumental to help us with educating the public and getting more people involved with the TMDL process. In some areas of the state, someone coming from the state doesn't really provide the same impact as a neighbor that is maybe involved with the TMDL process with collecting citizen data to reach out to their fellow neighbors about installing, say, cattle exclusion fencing and what have you. Real briefly on that image that's with this slide, it's one of our very first call-scan groups that we had. They monitored at 10 sites in the watershed. Originally, only 3 sites were monitored by DEQ. And the red areas were just below 2 major cow farms. And they always had high bacteria levels, and they happened to correspond where the DEQ sites were located. Now, site number 3 that you see there, that green square, that's after about a mile of waterway that has no human impacts. It's basically a forested buffer area. So what we were able to see with that call-scan data is that for that entire stretch of mile of stream, there really wasn't much need to put in any BMP work because there was no inputs there. So that actually helped us to kind of focus our TMDL program more towards trying to address issues such as those 2 local cattle operations to try to get those addressed so we would have a much bigger impact of the investment that we've given. On the next slide that we have here is a great example of how citizens can be helpful not only to state agencies such as us at the Department of Environmental Quality, but to local governments. This was a group that's located down in Poquoson City in the Tidewater area of Virginia, and they happened to monitor 2 sides of a roadway. It was just a residential street, crossed over a little stream that fed into a little bay area. They were using ColoScan, and they noticed very different E. coli numbers from one side of the road to the other. Downstream side had over 20,000, 30,000 E. coli per 100 milliliters versus maybe 3,000 or 600 upstream. Well, it comes to find out that there was a sewer line leak that occurred. The sewer line was running right underneath the road. It was actually caused by some damage by a contractor that was laying some fiber optic cable just prior to when they started monitoring, and did not report that they had broken the sewer line. They basically covered it up. Well, the citizen group notified the city. They came out, they did some testing, they confirmed that there was a leak, and they repaired it. And one of the great examples of showing the benefit of continued monitoring and continued local citizen engagement was that less than a week or exactly a week after that sewer line was repaired, you went from 30,000 E. coli to 200 E. coli. So it was a great example showing that if you're able to fix a problem, especially something like bacteria, the waterway will be restored very quickly afterwards. On our next slide here, just wanted to point out that in Virginia, we've recognized that we get a very great return of investment from our citizens. We estimate that we have about 1,200 citizen groups or citizen monitors in Virginia, and we estimate that they spend about 24 hours a year sampling, so about 2 hours a month. Accounting for their time, the amount of time that they've donated to monitor as well as the equipment that they're providing, we've calculated that about $750,000 is provided each year from citizen groups. in providing that data to us at Virginia. In return, our agency, through our staff time and through a $88,000 grant that we provide, we give about $200,000. So we get almost a 300% return of investment for what we're providing to citizen groups. And I think this is a great message for other states to look at, that they can get a very great, they're working with citizen monitoring groups and developing a really great program with the groups. You can get a really big return of your investment. And for my last slide, I just have a couple of quotes that were provided by some of our DEQ staff as well as by the Isaac Walton League of America, just recognizing the impact and the value that citizen groups have provided. And that's all I have.
You've sort of already done a good job of introducing Surfrider. You know, we're a nonprofit environmental organization, and our mission is the protection and enjoyment of our ocean waves and beaches. And on the next slide, I just wanted to illustrate, this is how we're organized. We have about 130 chapters, volunteer-run chapters in school clubs established across the country, largely in coastal states. Next slide. But who are we really? We're basically everybody who loves the beach. Yes, we're surfers, but we're also paddlers and swimmers, volleyball players, and just people who love the beach and want to make sure that it's a safe and clean experience. The beaches are accessible to the public, and they remain so for future generations. Next slide. Our environmental work is organized into these topic areas, and today, what I'll be concentrating is on our Clean Water Initiative, which in the next slide you'll see the main goal of all of our clean water work is to ensure that water quality in our local waterways is protected and to reduce ocean pollution so it's safe to surf, swim, and play in the ocean. Next slide. And, and by play, we could be out there enjoying, some nice surf breaks like this, or on the next slide, we have just as many members who love to just lounge a bit more in calmer waters. And on the next slide, and equally, we have people in more inland communities who like to be out paddling in fresh water. But we're all sort of united by this vision that our water should not, if we're recreating in the water, we should not be sick because of that. And we want to make sure it's clean and it's healthy. So one of the programs that we run so that communities know where their water pollution problems are and where it's safe is our Blue Water Task Force volunteer water testing program. We currently have about 40, I think we're up to 41 labs now, located across the country where we have citizen scientists providing critical water quality information to protect public health, raise awareness of pollution problems, and to bring together communities to find sources and implement solutions. Next slide, please. This is where we currently have our labs located. And then we certainly have a lot more on the West Coast because our chapters there are just a little bit more mature and developed, but we are starting to grow on the East Coast and certainly within Hawaii as well. If you look in the next slide, basically every one of those red dots, it's a different chapter run program run by volunteers, and each chapter sets up their program a bit differently to take advantage of local resources, opportunities, and partners. Most of our chapters partner with other groups to set up their labs, whether that's using borrowed space from aquariums or universities. Lots of our chapters have volunteers who get trained to participate directly in state and local beach programs or in other monitoring programs run by different watershed groups. And we also have a lot of chapters that work with local high school and community colleges generally to run their programs, where the lab equipment's set up in a environmental or marine biology lab. The chapter volunteers go out and usually collect the samples themselves, bring them to the lab where there's students who are trained underneath the advisement of one of their teachers to process the samples and post the results online. If you go to the next slide, sort of explains, we set up our sampling programs to really complement the agency-run beach programs. So this would be, programs run by state and county health departments. We're trying to fill in data gaps. We're often out there sampling year-round when agencies often will only be able to test during the summer beach season. We also, when the agencies have to sort of restrict their efforts oftentimes to lifeguarded beaches, we're out in other areas that are popular for recreation like surf spots, and also where those streams and different points of pollution are coming onto the beach and threatening public health. We are measuring enterococcus bacteria, as James had mentioned, and we use the IDEX Quantitrace Sealer and EnteroAlert methodology. You can go ahead and go to the next. We test for enterococcus bacteria because that's what the recreational water quality standard is set at, and that's what those measurements are how agencies decide to issue swim advisories and open and close beaches. So we're really trying to plug right into and complement agency efforts on the ground at the beaches in coastal states. All of our data is posted online on Surfrider's website. This is a map of all of our labs that are currently testing. There's a scrolling menu on the right where you can click on any lab. If you go to the next screen, you'll see that each lab has a map with all of their sampling sites posted, as well as the most recent data that's been collected. And if you can even click on each site name in that data table, and you can pull up all of the historical data for each site. This map is pretty typical. This comes from San Luis Obispo, where their sites located right on Pacific Ocean beaches have tested clean this past week, but some of their sites up the San Luis Obispo Creek, higher up in the watershed, are experiencing bacteria problems. One thing that's great about this website is it's pretty easy to share the data via social media, and many of our Surfrider chapters really have developed a pretty strong presence in their local communities with their Facebook and Instagram sites, and it's a great way for them to get information out on what they're doing, what they're finding, and to get volunteers plugged in. Let's see on the next slide what I have. Okay, so beyond Surfrider sites, we're also trying to get awareness for what we're doing out into other systems. So the water quality data for our Blue Water Task Force down in Rincon has been posted on the CARICOOS website, which is the Caribbean Coastal Ocean Observing System, for a number of years now. And we're starting to get our data also shared by other regional organizations such as Maricoos in the Mid-Atlantic and NANUS, which is over in the Northwest. We've also just this past few months added more of our Blue Water Task Force labs to the swim guide. So we're pretty excited about that because this is going to allow us to reach a whole new audience with our water quality data and literally get our data in the hands of people on their mobile devices at the beach as they try to figure out, where's the best place to go to the beach that day. So we're definitely excited on filling out this affiliation more this next year. Next slide. And, we're not just online. We're in the communities. We're doing workshops, education programs, giving presentations in front of community groups, city councils, town boards, so that people are really aware of what's happening in the water locally and starting to build the political will to solve some of the problems. Next slide, please. Which is really our main goal. Our volunteer water testing program, is providing information, but now we want to advocate and make sure that people are coming together so we can start solving those water quality problems, as James referred to earlier. Next slide. One of the best examples we have of this in our program is in Newport, Oregon. I'm going to say it was 12 to 15 years ago, the Newport, Oregon chapter of Surfrider set up a lab. They partnered with the Oregon Coast Aquarium, that's where their equipment was. The chapter collects the samples, brings them to the aquarium where trained youth volunteers that go through a particular program under the guidance of an aquarium staff, process the samples, and then they post the results online. After their first couple years of testing, the chapter gave a presentation to City Council showing that there were some pretty high bacteria levels in Nye Creek, which discharges onto Nye Beach. You can see it sort of coming out from underneath the city there. As it flows underneath Newport, it also, picks up a lot of storm water, and then it discharges onto the beach, flows across the beach and into the ocean. And if anyone's been to the beach in Oregon, the water's rough and the water's pretty cold as well. So when families go to the beach, of course, the kids are in this creek, they're splashing and swimming, and the parents figure it's the better choice. But after a couple years of presenting this information, actually, I don't even think it took that long. The city initially responded quite well. They posted the creek, warning parents, not to let their kids in there. And the state DEQ also picked up the creek as one of their beach sampling programs, part of their beach program. But this is where this sort of sat for a couple of years. We were excited about getting the signs and getting the interest and awareness, but we were having a hard time convincing the city to go look for what was causing these problems. And, going back a couple years and making the same presentations, finally the chapter got smart, and rather than going in again, they sent the student volunteers in. And that was way more impactful. So the students went in, presented their own data, made basically the same presentation that the adult volunteers had for a couple of years. But the clincher was they had this picture of some toilet paper that they had pulled out of the storm drain here, the discharge onto the beach. There's a reporter in the room. She went with it, and then very quickly the city responded. And on the next slide, you'll see they performed some smoke testing of their sewer and stormwater system, and they identified, I think, 10 to 12 misconnects where sewer lines that should have been going into the sewer were instead being discharged into that storm drain and literally directly out to the beach. And as James said, when you find these problems and you fix them, the water really responds well, quickly, and bacteria levels really improved. It was a much safer place at the beach and in the creek. Meanwhile, the chapter continued to work with both the city and the state, working on different stormwater management projects and policies to help deal with that source of pollution. Next slide. And for a number of years, the water quality remained pretty good. But then in 2015, the city, actually no, it was the state DEQ, measured a really pretty high bacteria spike out in that creek on the beach. And since Surfrider's lab is actually located right in Newport, and we have more capacity to go out and follow up sample, they called Surfrider and said, can you go out and run a couple samples, make sure, that was an accurate reading? It was, and so then the city is like, well, let's go look up the storm drains. Let's figure out where this is coming from. We want to fix it. I love this picture because it really illustrates that partnership between the citizen scientist pulling a water quality sample and a city employee out there directing traffic, making sure everybody stays safe. Next slide. But ultimately, going through and really giving a good analysis of the infrastructure within the city, there's a lot of old pipes under the ground, as there are in most communities, was beyond the capacity of what the chapter could perform. And the Surfrider chapter got together with the aquarium in the city, and with some funding from the Oregon Community Foundation, sponsored a Blue Water Scholar internship program. This went to a high school senior who was already participating in the program at the aquarium, and he went out and did a pretty comprehensive study looking through the stormwater system, trying to find where it seemed to be functioning properly and where there might be some issues that the city needed to focus on for their maintenance and replacement. No more silver bullets were identified like those misconnects, but it's going to be an ongoing process of elimination, figuring out, helping to prioritize the city, maintaining their system. Next slide. What I love about that story that I just told is it really illustrates the full circle of starting with a citizen scientist group trying to get awareness for a new pollution problem, finally, getting the attention of the authorities, and then really developing that relationship so that when it comes back, and new problems are identified, the city and the state are actually reaching out to the volunteers and saying, hey, can you help us, work on this issue? So it's a beautiful illustration on how everybody can work together to support clean water. We've got a lot more examples throughout our network of where we're not quite that far along on these problems. This is just a quick example of a site where we've found a new pollution problem. Again, it's a coastal pond that discharges through a stream across the Bay Beach and into the Peconic Bay on Long Island. Not an official lifeguarded beach, so there's no regular beach monitoring program there. However, a lot of families bring small children there. And after we reported our high bacterial levels at this site, the town responded, posted an advisory, and we're now working with the town to figure out where the pollution is coming from. And we're hoping that it's going to end similarly to the way that it has in Newport. Next slide, please. Now, this past year, we were faced with something completely new. Surfrider's Blue Water Task Force program is almost 25 years old. Our first lab started testing in '94. One of our strongest and biggest programs is down in Rincon, Puerto Rico, which, everybody in that program experienced the same thing that, when the hurricane hit this last year in September, no electricity, potable water was interrupted, communications were spotty at best, if at all, travel was challenging. But because that program had been there testing for like 10 years and really establishing a credible reputation for providing water quality information, and it established a lot of community partners, in just 1 month after the storm hit, they were able to get their lab reestablished. They brought their equipment over to a health center that had a generator so that they were able to resume their weekly beach sampling program. They, initially found the beaches generally were clean, with the exception of when runoff would impair the waters there, and where there was local issues with stormwater sewage infrastructure, and then they had that information to report to the authorities. Next slide. What was even more unique is they found that while it was good, to provide that beach water quality information, the real need was looking at fresh water, because there was no data available on whether the stormwater that was building up within the city or all the streams that were flowing through it, how safe or unsafe was it. And closer to the lab with electricity, we were able to run IDEX E. coli tests on many of those streams and found a lot of extremely high bacterial levels. And we did our best to get that information out into the community. Because we're talking about, even if people had water filters, in the weeks or months after the hurricane hit, they often didn't have running water in their homes, and, for washing and bathing. And it was pretty important that families knew to keep their kids out of this water. If we'll go on the next slide. And then, once communities started finding out that we were water testing again, because there really was very, very little agency testing, and none in many of the communities that we were reaching. It's the next slide where there's that's exactly where we need to be. We got approached by lots of communities, by lots of aid workers. At this particular site, it was this police officer who came to us and said, hey, can you come test this community source of water? We've got hundreds of families using literally this PVC pipe that's sticking out from the hillside here, getting stream water, into this little basin, and people were coming up and filling up jugs full of water and bringing it home for household use. And there was absolutely no information available on whether it was suitable for such a thing. Lots of these communities are sort of too far away from our lab to be able to run the IDEX methodology, so we started using these AguaGenex compartment bag tests. So rather than the trays with the illuminating cells, we're using these compartments. On the right-hand side, with the green water, you can see that that was actually from a rain cistern that was very polluted. And then on the left-hand side, where it's more that milky, clearish color, that was one day after a water filter was installed. So we were using this information to alert people to water sources that really weren't suitable. We were using it to identify areas where authorities really and aid workers should be focusing their efforts to get in water filters. And we were helping educate the communities on how best to take control of their own public health, because, you know, the government just really wasn't functioning to do that yet. So, you know, we never put ourselves in the position because, you know, we are not the health department. So we weren't saying, okay, go ahead, drink this water, don't drink this water. Even when we found low ecology E. coli levels, we were still recommending people use the water filters and boiling their water before they drink it. And then, yes, if you go to the next slide, Julie, you were right.
About 1 minute.
Yep, this is almost done too. We had to look for new ways to communicate our data because sharing on Facebook didn't work so well when nobody had internet connection or cell phone or electricity. So we got some spots on the local AM radio, and we used bulletin boards all over the city, you know, looking at places where people were going for relief and assistance and posting information on our water testing program and calling for volunteers. So this was a pretty unique situation that our program was situated in, but because of really that community work that they have been doing for the last 10 years, they were able to adapt to the situation and really meet a need for public health information in the short term. If you go to the last slide, Julie had asked me to post where I have some resources available. This is where I have a lot of information about our water testing programs, our lab instructions, standard operating procedures, and such. Again, it's on the Surfrider's website, and you have to click on that resources tab. And then I just want to draw your attention to the bottom two. The Center for Watershed Protection and the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper have both developed excellent guides for citizen bacteria monitoring programs that I recommend you checking out. And that's it for me. Thank you.